You're hearing Global News Analysis by Swaves. Our top story today, Nepal's Gen Z riots, a local uprising with global reverberations. We evaluate by deep diving into a multifaceted issue faced by Nepal, its causes, instigations, influences, consequences, benefits, and risks of all the factors involved in these riots either directly or indirectly. Nepal, the Himalayan nation often caught between its own political instability and the competing ambitions of global powers, is once again in turmoil. Nepal has been moving closer to China by strategic partnerships, supporting Belt and Road Initiative BRY, and developing national policies that benefits China. Though major influence on Nepal has been India, the ministers are favoring China by developing close ties with them. They have made their policy adjustments to reflect anti-India and pro-China continuing ties with India. They are aware that leaning too much toward China can strain ties with India, but turning away from China can reduce options, and they lean towards China more. In practice, Nepal seems to be pursuing a hedging strategy, not abandoning India, but trying to ensure China is a viable partner, both for development and strategic backup, but are ignoring the geopolitical strain as a result due to viewpoints and national interests. Nepal has been through years of corruption, joblessness, and mismanagement. However these factors are in every other country, they may not lead political upheaval in a country unless someone wants to push this further. There are several factors impacting these riots. Let us see the narrative for the incident to trigger. Nepal's youth took to the streets this year. Their demands were simple: an end to corruption, freedom of expression, and a fair shot at the future. But in the span of weeks, their protests have become more than a domestic reckoning with a controversial social media ban has spiraled into nationwide riots when the government moved to restrict social media platforms, citing national security concerns as the sites did not register. Following their Supreme Court's order, for Nepal's Gen Z activists, who see digital freedom as synonymous with personal freedom, this was the last straw after years of corruption, joblessness, and elite mismanagement, shaking the foundations of Nepal's fragile democracy and drawing in the interests of India, China, the United States, Europe, and even Pakistan, and have become a stage for global power games. Thousands of young Nepalis are on the streets of Kathmandu and other major cities, demanding accountability, transparency, and a fair future. Social media is flooded with images of defiant students, tech-savvy activists, and workers joining the demonstrations. At the core, the protests appear to be secular, anti-elite, and grassroots-driven. But are they as simple as they appear? Maybe not. In the background, religious and nationalist voices, especially advocates of a return to Hindu monarchy, while secularists are trying hard to upkeep the secular framework of the state. Both are attempting to redirect the public anger toward their own agendas, and therefore, it is an internal political struggle and foreign power vying to control the factors. Are they really Gen Z activists? Of course, they are only a fraction of all the forces involved. Experts warn that the situation could mirror other South Asian unrest, from Manipur in India to street protests in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, where youth frustrations collide with geopolitics, nationalism, and religion. The deep state factor. Nepal's deep state analysts argue that elements of Nepal's deep state, networks of bureaucrats, security elites, and power brokers, may be allowing the unrest to fester. A prolonged crisis could justify stronger security measures, weaken civilian leaders, and open space for new political alignments more favorable to certain factions. For ordinary protesters, however, this means their calls for change risk being co-opted or silenced once the state reasserts control. The US, the UK, and the EU deep state factors. Though there is no evidence that the U.S. created riots in Nepal and the protests appear rooted in domestic grievances, through long-term funding, training, and diplomatic framing, U.S. programs can and do make civil society more capable of mobilizing and holding elites to account. That effect is similar to patterns observed in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and with much larger scale, Ukraine. They make foreign aid more politically combustible. The US-led deep state have ties with the UK and the EU deep states and operate similarly. Nepal's move towards China is cautioning the US and the rest of the world. Nepal is in the China-India sphere, where the US is influential but more indirect, but the higher the geopolitical stakes, the bolder the mix of instruments. They use channels such as long-horizon relationship building through years of funding, visible grants plus discreet diplomatic pressure, technical assistance, and exchanges that cultivate local partners helps them to focus on institutions, not just protests, elections, media, rule of law, anti-corruption bodies. Core instruments frequently used by U.S. state actors, often in combinations, are development aid and grants, for example, USAID, MCC, Millennium Challenge Corporation, funds projects that build governance capacity, infrastructure, or civil society resilience. Civil society via NGO funding and training like grants to local NGOs, media training, legal aid, anti-corruption programs which strengthen organizations that can mobilize, investigate corruption, and document rights abuses. Soft power, people-to-people programs like scholarships, exchange programs, youth training. Public diplomacy and messaging via embassy statements, press releases, monitoring of freedoms that frames narratives in favor of democracy and human rights. Targeted technical assistance like electoral support, rule of law training, cybersecurity, and communications capacity building for practical capacity building that can also shape institutional norms. Coming to geopolitics, let's see how this impacts India, China, and Pakistan. India, meanwhile, risks the most. Along the dominant influence in Nepal, India seeks stability but fears the revival of Hindu monarchy could backfire, empowering forces it cannot fully control. The riots also distract New Delhi at a time when it faces challenges in Manipur, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, stretching its resources. China. While there is no evidence Beijing orchestrated the unrest, it stands to gain. Instability weakens India's grip on Nepal and creates openings for China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, where every riot makes BRI look more necessary, elite capture, and soft power outreach to disillusioned youth. A Nepal unsettled by corruption, yet rejecting Indian dominance, could it be fertile a ground for Beijing's pragmatic partnership? China doesn't need to start the fire, it only needs to stand ready with water or gasoline. Pakistan and other Islamic extremists. With limited direct influence, Islamabad benefits indirectly from India's distraction. Nepal's instability complements Pakistan's narrative of Indian weakness in managing its neighborhood. The West, the USA, and Europe play a double game. United States publicly supports democracy, transparency, and youth empowerment. Privately, Washington sees Nepal as a strategic counterweight to China, a potential hub for intelligence near Tibet, where it can monitor India, China, and Pakistan, and religious conversions, and a battleground for digital influence where U.S. tech companies could expand. European Union frames its role as supporting governance reforms and climate resilience. Beneath the surface, Europe seeks economic access to Nepal's energy, tourism, and infrastructure sectors and religious conversions, while projecting itself as a global defender of democratic values. Both risk being accused of neo-colonialism if their hidden agendas, countering China, expanding markets, shaping youth narratives, overshadowing genuine support for Nepalese democracy. Let's see in the viewpoint of religion and identity politics. Though primarily secular, the protests carry the shadow of religion. Hindu nationalists claim secular democracy has failed and call for monarchy revival. Christians and Muslims, small minorities, are not central to the riots but feature in broader narratives. Christians tied to Western NGOs, Muslims linked to cross-border politics. The real battlefield remains secularism itself. Activists demand a modern, inclusive republic, while elites see opportunity in reawakening religious identity to hold power. Regional parallels: Manipur, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. Nepal's unrest is not isolated. Similar youth-driven or identity-driven movements across South Asia reveal a pattern. Manipur, India. Ethnic and religious violence distracts New Delhi and exposes vulnerabilities. Bangladesh. Anti-corruption and anti-elite protests mirror Nepal's demands, with youth movements facing authoritarian pushback. Sri Lanka. Nepal's unrest is not yet an economic collapse like Sri Lanka's, but it shares the same DNA of corruption, elite failure, and youth disillusionment. If ignored, Nepal could drift toward a hybrid of Sri Lanka's crisis, elite collapse, and Bangladesh's unrest. In each case, instability around India creates strategic breathing room for China. Who gains and who loses? Winners may be China having advantages of strategic leverage, weaker India. Nepalese elites who exploit unrest to reshuffle power. Western powers, if they can channel youth anger into pro-democracy narratives aligned with their geopolitical interests. Losers may be Nepalese activists if their demands are hijacked or suppressed. India may face instability both at home and in its neighborhood due to Nepal's fallout. Ordinary citizens who may see chaos deepen economic hardship. The aftermath for activists. The fate of Nepal's Gen Z activists is uncertain. Some may join formal political movements, while others risk burnout, repression, or disillusionment if systemic change does not follow. Many will continue to be influenced by nationalist or religious narratives, but the digital-savvy generation is also likely to forge new paths of self-organization, less tied to traditional parties or ideologies. Nepal's risks and opportunities. Risks: political fragmentation, foreign manipulation, economic stagnation, potential religious polarization. Opportunities: a genuine chance to renew democracy, empower youth voices, and strike a balance between secular inclusivity and national identity. By far, let's conclude with Nepal's Gen Z revolt becomes a global chessboard. For the protesters, the stakes are high. They risk being co-opted, silenced, or sidelined. The 2025 Nepal riots began as a grassroots rejection of corruption, but they now sit at the crossroads of local frustration, historical religious secular struggles, and global power plays. Yet they also hold the chance to reshape Nepalese politics in their own image, digitally savvy, secular, and uncompromising against corruption. Every major actor, India, China, the US, Europe, Pakistan, wants a piece of the pie. The deep state maneuvers quietly, the youth demand loudly, and religious forces wait for their moment. For now, the streets of Kathmandu echo with chants for justice, but above them looms a geopolitical chessboard where every major power, from Washington to Beijing, wants a piece of Nepal's future. And in the middle of this geopolitical feeding frenzy lies Nepal's deep state, playing its own shadowy game. By letting the protests burn, it gains justification for tighter security controls. By waiting out the chaos, it may choose its moment to reassert dominance, regardless of what the protesters actually wanted. It started as a fight for their own dignity, their own future. Yet already, the slogans of secular youth are being twisted into the language of nationalism, monarchy, or foreign investment with its original intention surpassed. The tragedy is not that Nepal's youth lack courage. They have it in abundance. The tragedy is that every step they take forward risks being hijacked by forces more powerful, more entrenched, and more cynical than themselves. Nepal today stands at a crossroads. One path leads to renewed democracy, fragile, flawed, but forged by the generation in the streets. The other path leads to a Nepal carved up on a geopolitical chessboard, where local voices are drowned out by foreign whispers. The choice may ultimately rest not in the hands of Kathmandu's elites, or Beijing, or Washington, but in whether Nepal's youth can resist being turned into pawns, and insist against all odds on being players. The ultimate question is whether Nepal's activists can hold on to their secular democratic vision, or whether they will be swept aside by the geopolitical chessboard being played over their heads. Let's see how the story unfurls.